Mixing with Mike boot camp tip. What comes first, the EQ or the compressor? It's not really the existential question of what came first, the chicken or the egg, but it is something that confounds a lot of engineers. And I wanted to try to clear up and give you some ideas of the way that I look at it and the way I've seen most other engineers look at it. There's no real hard line answer that will work in every situation, and you kind of have to take it on a case-by-case basis based on which sounds best. The conventional wisdom would dictate that the EQ is after the compressor. So you see here in this SSL J series channel strip, I have the dynamic section pre, so that the compression is occurring before I go about the process of equalization. And this can work very well. If I go to make later changes in the EQ, I don't have to worry about adapting my threshold or adapting the compression settings to match up with the new equalization that I do, and that simplifies the process. On the other hand, there's also the case of putting the dynamic section after the EQ. And the benefit there is that the EQ that you place in will now be driving the compression. So for example, if you have acoustic recorded drums and say they sound very boxy, you would have the ability to remove some of that boxiness before getting into the compressor, really focus in on the fundamental frequencies of the kick, snare, and toms, get the attack frequency set right. So now when it goes into the compressor is really dynamically responding to the frequencies that you want it to respond to. So what I wanted to do here was set up a quick audio example, because essentially the way that I look at this and the way I generally approach it as a starting point is that I isolate or separate out acoustically recorded instruments and vocals from things that are artificially generated. Now, vocals obviously are always acoustically recorded, but all other instruments, you could have programmed drums, which are basically pre-processed sounds, or things that are synthetically generated, which basically don't have the artifacts or problems of room, noise, resonances, in acoustic spaces and all of that sort. So the idea with all the things and all the problems that you might have with acoustic drums, like close miking techniques that cause certain frequencies to come through more clearly than others, generally in the mid-range 400 to 800 range, you get a lot of boxiness from close miking techniques, and then a lot of natural room resonances that come in. So if I play here I'm going to play here a drum kit and bass, and this is flat, so this is just as is, and then I will go through and demonstrate what it sounds like with the dynamics pre or post EQ. So you can hear there that there's a lot of buildup in that 400 to 800 range, a lot of boxiness. So I went through each track, kind of cleaned up the different areas, where the boxiness occurs, focus in on the fundamentals and attack frequencies, and then set up two examples. So the EQ is identical, the compression settings are identical, other than a shift in the threshold. And what I'll have here are two examples. The first example will be what this sounds like now with the dynamic section or compression prior to the EQ. And I'm going to A/B that in and out. Right, so nice, cleaned up. All of that, and now I have the identical setup. This time I have the dynamic section post EQ. So again, the only thing that I adapted here with the threshold so that I got the same amount of gain reduction, same movement, and here's this A beat in and out. Okay, so now I'm going to do a comparison of one here with the EQ, with the dynamics pre-EQ, and then one with the dynamics post-EQ, right? So we'll start pre-EQ, and what I want you to really notice here is how much the boxiness that's inherent in the original sound, right, prior to the EQ, how much that cuts through now with the compression in a way that it doesn't when the dynamics or the compressor is after the EQ. So again, the first one here, the top one is the dynamics pre-EQ. Second one is the dynamics post-EQ. Here we go. Okay, so you hear a bit of difference there, or you should. You hear a little bit more presence, a little bit more focus. Now I want you to listen to it with the rest of the music in, because you may be inclined to think, well, is this really that big of a difference? And I'm not going, extreme with the EQ here. See, many of these boosts are like just a couple dB, so it's not like I'm adding 20 dB of anything. But here I'm going to mix in, throw in the guitars and the keys and the vocals. And now let's have a listen. And now I want you to notice the difference in the drums with the other music. We'll start with the dynamics pre-EQ, and then I'll go to post-EQ and do a similar thing to what we just did.
Sitting on the ground, facing static, and I look for a way to roll over. Murder by satellite, or playing madness. At least I'm an organ donor. It's automatic, this is in my tree. You're making me rich. Sentimental, suicide. Why do we resist? It's automatic, you're not on call. It's automatic, you're not there. It's automatic, you're not on call. It's automatic, you're not there.
So in this example, you could hear how with the compressor post-EQ, how the drums cut through more. Even just that little bit of boxiness, or that area where the guitars really need that frequency area more and the vocals need that frequency area more, fill out that space better and the drums cut through. Again, it's not like this huge dramatic difference, but pay attention to these subtle differences. They accumulate over the course of a record. I went through and did this whole mix here, going through track by track and figuring out where it sounded best pre or post. In most cases, what I've found is that acoustically recorded signals most often, not always, most often end up sounding better with the compression after the EQ. And program sounds, which are, if they're programmed well, are much closer to the sound that you're looking for, work better if you compress first and EQ after. And that just kind of simplifies some of the other things of boosting frequencies or cutting frequencies and having to adjust the threshold, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the basics of it. A really important small lesson. Sometimes it makes just like a huge difference. Like you listen to it, especially when you start to boost very heavily. This is a process that's really used quite a lot, where you can run really extreme settings of equalization and then just really crush it with the compression. And what you end up with is something that has a lot of hype and presence and focus without actually sounding harsh or sounding like it cuts your head off. And that's any skill that you can learn along those lines is going to help you with any record you make. Even if that's not the exact sound that you're going for. You can do it with less extreme settings, just like I showed you here, and get amazing results. This tip and many others in much more vivid detail is available in the boot camp. The boot camp is a 52-week program on the mixingwithmike.com website, and it's an intensive study in the art of mixing, all centered around mix analysis of commercial productions, great sounding mixes. And what I break down in this course is mixing strategies, the way that mixes are designed, and how you create all these layers of sound and get instruments to work together and create shifting tonalities and depth and characteristic mix dynamics, essentially. And that's what the whole course is about. So check it out at mixingwithmike.com, and hope to see you there.